everyone, welcome back to The Dark Side. I'm your host Sherry. Today we're talking about a 19-year-old man named Dylan Rounds. Dylan disappeared in May of 2022. His disappearance has a lot of the same elements other missing person cases have, but we do have an outcome in this case. It does end up getting solved, which is something we don't see a lot of times. Dylan is a hard-working young man. You know how sometimes older folks will say kids don't want to work these days? Well, Dylan is the best example of a young person who does want to work. It's his entire life. This one is for Kevin. Kevin is a longtime listener from way back in the early beginnings of the show. He tunes in every episode. When I first heard of this case a couple years ago, I read a lot about Dylan, and I remember thinking he reminded me a lot of Kevin. My sources are in the description area. This is episode 122, The Case of Dylan Rounds. This story took place in 2022. All of the 2020 COVID restrictions were over by this point. Russia invaded Ukraine. Queen Elizabeth celebrated 70 years on the throne. She passed away several months later. Women's basketball player Brittany Griner was detained in Russia for possession of marijuana. John Hinckley Jr., who was the man who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan back in 1981, was released from prison. He is 69 years old today in 2024. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Don't even get me started on that one. And in some good news, spinal implants became a thing. In trials, it allowed paralyzed folks to walk. Dylan Rounds was born August 1st, 2002. 2002. It is so hard for me to even fathom that. At the time of our story in 2022, Dylan is 19 years old. His parents are Justin and Candace. He is the oldest of three. When his mom was pregnant with him, she was told she was having a girl, so they prepared to have a girl, but Dylan was born and they were shocked to learn he was a boy. His parents divorced when he was 4 years old. Dylan grew up loving watching men in his family work, and he wanted to be like them when he grew up. When others his age were learning how to ride a bike, Dylan was already driving a tractor. He was growing pumpkins in a patch at age 10, and he also grew corn that he would sell on the side of the road, which is adorable. Dylan may look like a 19-year-old, but he is different than a lot of people his age. Sun up to sundown, he is working. He had dreams of owning and operating his own farm one day. Farming is his life. When I was 19, I didn't have anywhere near the work ethic Dylan has. He just graduated from Rigby High School in Idaho. Dylan has no interest in going to college or doing the things other boys his age do. He just wants to farm. Dylan is a visionary. He has these big plans to own and operate his own farm. In his very limited free time, he enjoyed fishing and riding dirt bikes. So Dylan lives in Idaho, but his grandfather knew Dylan had something special in him and wanted to help him get started. So Dylan, with the help of his grandfather, purchased 640 acres of land in Lucin, Utah. It's about 4 hours from Idaho. I had to look this up because I pictured Utah being way further away from Idaho, but it's actually just a few hours. They buy this piece of land with the intention that Dylan would live alone on it and be the farmer. Land in Lucin, Utah was much cheaper than buying a plot in Idaho. The catch was that Dylan had lots of work to do to get the land ready to be a farm. It's mostly sand. Dylan would spend every day getting this land ready. There isn't anything in Lucin, Utah, and Dylan lives alone in a camper on his land. Lucin is described as a ghost town. It's on the Utah-Nevada border. I read the most people that ever lived there at one time was in the early 1900s when they had a population of 200 people. Right now, there are less than 5 residents. It's part of Box Elder County, so if you want to do anything, you have to head to another part of the county, or you can drive about 30 minutes and you're in a small town in Nevada. Lucin is known to have squatters and drug users just hiding around. If you look at Lucin on a map, it's just sand and some grassy spots, no businesses or anything like that. According to Realtor.com, Lucin was originally founded as a water stop on the railroad for steam engines to refill their tanks. Ponds were constructed using a pipeline from the Pilot Mountain Range and are still full today, though the town is empty. Railroad employees and their families made up the majority of the town's population, but they left the area as the railroads moved on. Retired railroad workers resettled the area briefly in 1936, but it's mainly been empty since then. But Dylan loves it there. If he needs to go to a store or grab dinner at a restaurant, he just drives 30 minutes across the Utah border to a small town in Nevada called Montello. Montello has a grocery store and 2 bars. It's very small as well, with a population of only 35 people. Dylan has a friend named Curtis in this town. Curtis lived in a camper behind a bar. Since Dylan didn't have any running water or electric at his camper on the farm, he would go to Curtis's camper to take a shower and charge his phone. I wonder if Dylan felt lonely at times. He's in a ghost town. He has no neighbors. There's literally nothing around for miles. I don't even think he could get mail out there. Dylan didn't live full time at the camper, though. He would go to his mom's house and his dad's house and his friend's house and stay a few days, but the farm was his home base. Dylan is 19 and he's got this huge plot of land all to himself, and it's finally becoming a farm. He's just a few hours from his family. Life is good. Sun up to sundown, Dylan is tilling the land, getting it ready for its first crop. In May of 2022, he is almost there. He spent 2 years redeveloping the land. He's got the water going out there, although there wasn't any in the camper. His mom, Candace, told People magazine that it was now a fully functional farm. Dylan talked to his family almost every day on the phone. Dylan also had a best friend back home he talked to a couple times a week. Everyone says he was so excited for his first crops. They were going to bloom, and Dylan felt wonderful at all he had accomplished. I had to learn a little about farming for this story. This is an area I know nothing about, but it was really interesting to learn about. There's a lot of work that goes into farming. For Dylan to make this happen on what was once just sand is phenomenal. It's crazy to think he started this when he was just 17 years old, and now he's 19. On Thursday, May 26, 2022, Dylan talked to his parents on the phone. They say he was so happy, and he talked about planting seed this weekend. This is the moment he's been working the last 2 years for. This is his first crop. But he told his mom about a weird encounter he had earlier with a guy, and I'll get to that shortly. Dylan was seen that day in Montello, Nevada, which is that little town in Nevada that is 30 minutes away from his farm. He was spotted eating dinner at a bar. 2 days later, this is Saturday, May 28, 2022, Memorial Day weekend. According to NBC's Missing in America, Dylan had worked late into the night spreading seed for his first crop. Dylan's up early again the next morning. At 6:51 a.m., he receives a call from his grandmother. He tells Grandmom he can't talk. He says a storm is coming and he's got to move his grain truck to the shed. If the rain hits the seed in the back of the truck, it will be ruined. It had a tarp on it, but he couldn't take the chance of water getting in. The shed is 5 miles down the road from his camper. I call it a shed, but it's more like a really huge barn. It belongs to another landowner in the area, but Dylan had gotten permission to use it whenever he wanted. Dylan tells his grandmom he would call her back. But Dylan never called his grandmom back. That was the last time anyone in his family spoke to him. The next day, Grandmom becomes a little worried because Dylan never called her back. She tries to reach him but doesn't get an answer. It was normal for them to go a couple days without speaking to him, but he would always answer if they called. If he didn't, he'd call right back. But she didn't jump to the worst conclusion because everyone knew this was a big weekend for Dylan, getting his first crop ready, so he may be super busy. 2 days later, when everyone in his family realizes that no one has talked to him, they all decide to make the 4-hour trek to his farm. First, they called 2 men that the family knows that live nearby because they're the closest. These were 2 guys Dylan had as employees at one time. They tell the family they don't see Dylan anywhere and nothing seems out of place. Once the family got there, they don't see any sign of anything major that had happened there. They see his grain truck was in the shed down the road. once he dropped his grain truck off, he would have had to walk the 5 miles back to his camper. So they start searching the area. Again, it's a ghost town with nothing around. Maybe he got bitten by a snake and is laying on the ground somewhere. Maybe he ran into someone bad who was out walking, but they don't find any evidence of him in the 5 miles between the grain truck and his camper. All of Dylan's farm equipment was accounted for, so he wasn't robbed and he didn't have a tractor accident of some kind. They go inside the camper and notice his truck's key fob is missing. His cell phone is missing and his pistol was gone. Just the holster was sitting there. This is rural Utah. Dylan likely carried everywhere he went. You never know what you'll come across, whether it be a wild animal or you may run into a bad person. Dylan is officially a missing person at this point. The Box Elder Sheriff's Department will be leading the case. At first, the police have a lot of questions for the family. Do you think he just ran away? His parents say no, there is 100% no way that he just took off. First off, his truck is still here. Secondly, this weekend was his big day. He had waited 2 years for this. Dylan had no issues. His mom said the only concern he had was just getting his crops to grow. He wasn't into drugs or anything like that. He wasn't depressed. He didn't have any girls he was interested in. He was happy. But police just see a 19-year-old kid who lived on his own and isn't home right now. They think maybe he's out partying with friends in another town. His parents are trying to tell them that no, that's not the case. Dylan has access to money, a lot of money. Anytime he needed a part for his tractor or gas or food, there is money available to him. Did he say, screw this farm, I want to invest my time into girls and video games and other things guys my age do? His family thinks there's no way in the world that this could be the case. They feel something terrible happened to Dylan. There's no hits on his bank account since a few days before. Candace told People magazine at this point she's 99% sure someone killed her son. About 90 minutes into the search, they finally get something. About 300 yards from the shed where the grain truck was parked, behind a huge pile of dirt, sat Dylan's boots. They were located in the opposite direction of where he would be walking back to his camper. This is concerning because why are his boots off? Dylan wouldn't take his boots off before making the 5-mile trek back to his farm. When asked if he may have changed into another pair of boots, his mom said he only had one pair of boots. When they became worn out, he would buy the exact same pair. But what stood out the most was there was a dark red spot on the boots. The police believe initially that this spot is hydraulic fluid, but it was eventually determined to be blood. Now, there's been a lot of talk about these boots because they were allegedly just tossed into the police car where they stayed for a few days before being tested. They should have been carefully handled with gloves and put into a sterile bag or box while being transported. They talked to 2 guys, one named Don and one named James. These are the 2 that the family asked to look for Dylan before they made their trip there. These 2 were former employees of Dylan. James had a real bad criminal past and is much older than Dylan. James didn't like having to take orders from a 19-year-old. Both of these men say they don't know where he could be. The camper has Dylan's truck parked outside. This is his personal truck. They found it odd because the doors were locked. Dylan didn't usually lock it. There's no one around for miles. The police give the family permission to break into the truck since the key fob is missing. This is a 2015 Ford F-150 with an extended crew cab, and it's huge, so they break the back window out. Candace says that the first thing she noticed was that the seat was pulled up much closer than Dylan would have it at. She said Dylan is a foot taller than her, and she could comfortably drive the truck in this position. They also noticed the truck was in 4-wheel drive. Well, Dylan had told them recently that the truck's 4-wheel drive wasn't working. The transfer case was broken. They didn't find his key fob, his wallet, his phone, or pistol while searching the truck. They noticed that the truck had been washed recently, like within the last day or 2, but not just washed. It looked like someone used a power washer on it, which is the worst thing you can do for the paint. Whoever power washed the truck missed the wheel wells because there's still a lot of mud caked on in the wheel wells. Candace remembers back to just a few days before. She remembered something Dylan had told her on the phone. On Thursday, he said he was driving down a gravel road near his farm and encountered a strange man. He said the man came out of nowhere and flagged him down. Dylan pulls up next to him and the man is barefoot, yet he's walking on a gravel road. He appears to be in distress and has blood on him. It's not one of those situations where he encountered someone who was hurt and needed help. The guy appeared to be on drugs and was acting bizarre. Dylan said it really freaked him out. The man asked to use Dylan's phone and he let him use it. And then he asked if he could give him a ride to Montello, Nevada, which is that small town nearby Dylan goes to a lot. Dylan told his mother that he didn't give him a ride, but I've read there's evidence that he did give him a ride. We learned that his name is Chase Venstra, and he is around 40 years old. Chase has a lengthy criminal past. Whether he gave Chase the ride or not, we know he made it back to the farm. He talked to his mom on the phone later that day and told her about the man he had encountered. The family requested that the police bring in bloodhounds to search the property, but the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office denied their request. The family gets the word out that they have a $20,000 reward to anyone who can tell them where Dylan is. Dylan's father, Justin Rounds, told East Idaho News that he has $20,000 burning a hole in his pocket. Just bring me my son. Of course, this reward will bring out all kinds of weirdos, especially in Montello, where there's a lot of meth addicts. No, I'm not knocking the whole town, but Montello, Nevada is known to be a hotspot for meth addicts. The family received a call that Dylan was being held captive by two men in Montello. 6 officers go out there and didn't find anything. The next day, when the family goes into Dylan's camper, they are shocked to find Dylan's key fob for his truck is sitting out in the open. This was not there previously. Someone came in when no one was there and placed it there. The family is 100% certain it was not there before. They were so sure it wasn't that they broke out the back window of his truck because they couldn't find it anywhere. Now it's just sitting out in the open. Another thing they found in the camper that was not there the day before, Dylan's pistol was returned. The clip was empty and sitting next to it. This is a perfect instance where a security camera outside could have solved this case in 2 seconds. The pistol was found in the bathroom. People used that bathroom yesterday and it wasn't in there. Someone definitely came in overnight. Meanwhile, that shed that Dylan moved his grain truck to, James Brenner, the older man with the lengthy criminal past, he had been squatting on that property in a camper next to the shed where Dylan was parking his truck. Well, he is taking out bags of trash. The entire time he's doing this, the Box Elder Sheriff's Department is watching him. They don't ask him what's in the bags. They don't search the bags. They just let him continue to clean the shed. He yells that they are beer cans and other trash. I have to go off record for a moment and just vent. It seems like Dylan was this nice kid with a great head on his shoulders, and he would give you the shirt off his back. He would give you money or a job if you needed it. There's no question about Dylan's character here. But he's surrounded by bad people where he's at, people who aren't kind and loving folks. Dylan just wanted to farm. That's all he wanted, and it pisses me off that someone may have put an end to that. He's got all these criminals around him making it hard. He was so kind, and he employed these men who were 2 and 3 times his age. He's only 19. He deserved better than how they treated him. Another thing that hit me was that eventually the FBI gets involved and they take Dylan's truck and camper off the property, and that made me sad. I don't know why that in particular hit me as hard as it did. Maybe it's because those were Dylan's items and now they're being carted away from the farm to be processed. I know it has to be done to help solve the case, but it's just sad to think about. According to a timeline put together by Missing in America, during the first week of searches, Box Elder County Sheriff's Department and Weber County Fire and Rescue were out on foot and also used helicopters, an airplane, horses, and cadaver dogs. They called off the search after 6 hours with no signs of Dylan. The next day, the family and friends of Dylan organized a search party with close to 300 volunteers. This included 5 private air searches. They also searched abandoned mine shafts in the area. The pond near Dylan's farm was drained, and he wasn't in there. On June 15th, this is a little over 2 weeks that Dylan has been missing. The investigation is reclassified from a missing person investigation to a criminal investigation. It's at this point that the FBI came in and took out Dylan's truck and camper. From all accounts, it appears there's 3 possible suspects. There's Chase Venstra, who was the man who flagged him down for a ride days earlier. Chase has an extensive criminal history. In 2016, Chase was involved in a 10-hour standoff with police. He barricaded himself in his house and eventually stopped communicating with the officers outside, so the SWAT team sent in a robot. The robot went room to room, clearing each one, and Chase had taken off out the back door and was quickly arrested. Chase did cooperate with police when talking about Dylan, but he was arrested on unrelated gun charges. Chase is cleared in Dylan's disappearance. He did come forward and he said that he was the man who flagged Dylan down that day. He said Dylan did give him a ride to Montello, even though he told his mom he didn't. Chase, although arrested on weapons charges, was cleared because his phone pinged in a location nowhere remotely close to Dylan's farm. Plus, they have him on surveillance 200 miles away at a Flying J stop and then at a KFC at the time Dylan disappeared. The next suspect is Kurt Wadsworth. Kurt is the man in Montello, Nevada, who Dylan would go visit and sometimes stay the night in his camper so he could have water and electricity. Kurt is 62 years old. He was interviewed by a podcast called True Crime with Jess, and it didn't do him any favors, in my opinion. He said Dylan was a great kid with ambitions. He said he was Dylan's backhoe operator for some time. He says he will be the key to solving this case because he knows Dylan more than anyone else. Everyone's like, what? There's been a lot of speculation about Kurt online, which I don't want to say on here because he hasn't been charged with anything relating to Dylan, but I can't find anything good that anyone had to say about him. And the third person is James Brenner. James is 58 years old. He lives in a camper 5 miles from Dylan's farm and next to the shed where Dylan was headed that day to park his grain truck inside. He doesn't own any of this land. He's just squatting on it free of charge. James is a major alcoholic with a violent past. He worked for Dylan at some point and didn't like taking orders from him. Police and a lot of other folks involved are trying to see if there's a connection between Dylan and another young man who went missing recently, a man by the name of Aidan Clune. Aidan Clune is 19 years old. He disappeared on April 27th, just 1 month before Dylan. He disappeared from Curry, Nevada, which is also a ghost town with less than 20 residents. It's located about 2 hours from Lucin, Utah, where Dylan was. He parked his truck on the highway and no one has seen him since. That's about where the similarities end. According to the Charlie Project, the investigators found footprints leading away from the truck and into the desert. They determined Aidan then took his shoes off and began running. Aidan's family says that he was suffering with depression and had recently gone through a breakup. His family says he may have been going through a psychosis episode. There's been a lot of supposed sightings of Aidan over the last 2 years, but he is still officially missing today in August 2024. The public search for Dylan is halted temporarily because the police and EquiSearch need the area clear to do another of their searches. This was a really rough area. 18 mines and caves were searched in the area with no sign of Dylan. At this time, the family increased their reward to $100,000. On June 16th, this is around 3 weeks since Dylan vanished, the police arrive at James Brenner's trailer armed with a search warrant. They found lots of ammunition, black powder, ignition caps, and speed loads relating to muzzle loading in his camper. On June 23rd, James was charged with counts of having firearms. James had felonies and wasn't supposed to have any guns, but they found all this stuff in his trailer. This is wonderful news to Dylan's family because if James is responsible for Dylan's disappearance, he won't be able to run. He's already being held in jail. He's going to be there for quite a while. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. Think back to last week's episode. Remember the killer went on the run and still is today? James won't have that luxury. Someone close to James said that he brought him over a .22 rifle and asked him to hold it for him because he's a felon and not supposed to have guns. This sounds a lot like Chase Venstra's case. It's crazy that two persons of interest in Dylan's case were charged separately with having guns that they aren't supposed to own due to their felony record. On July 7th, 2022, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Department and the FBI released a joint statement. They talked about how Dylan's disappearance sparked arrests of multiple people on unrelated gun charges. Then they said, based on the evidence that they gathered during their investigation, James Brenner is no longer a person of interest. James has now been upgraded to a suspect in Dylan's disappearance. He is still being held in jail on unrelated charges, so all good there. Justin Rounds, Dylan's father, recalled a time recently when he was visiting Dylan and he spoke to James Brenner. James was annoyed because Dylan had backed into a horse gate near James's area. It didn't seem like much at the time, but they wonder if this set off a chain of events. Keep in mind, James does not own the property down the road from Dylan. He's just squatting there so he gets a free place to live. On August 1st, this is Dylan's 20th birthday. According to Missing in America, the family asked the nation to pay tribute to Dylan by planting black-eyed Susan seeds. I'm assuming black-eyed Susans were his favorite flower. They also had a huge billboard erected with Dylan's picture and a phone number to call if you know his whereabouts. Also, it noted a $100,000 reward. 2 months later, the reward was increased to $200,000. According to writer Nate Eaton for the East Idaho News, Dylan's phone records were analyzed, and it was determined that Dylan talked to his grandmother on the phone that morning. We all know that already. He told her a storm was coming and he had to get his grain truck inside before it gets wet. Then we learn he called James Brenner, likely to tell him he would be there in a minute, so you'll hear me go in the shed. Then it showed the phone stayed at James Brenner's location for a bit, and then it went back to Dylan's camper. Then it went back to James Brenner's, and then it went to the pond. James had told police he stopped by the pond that day on his way to a friend's house to eat lunch, so he placed himself at that pond that day, and that's where Dylan's phone was found. A digital forensic download is done on Dylan's phone, and what was found on it was shocking. 30 minutes after Dylan hung up the phone with his grandmother, a video began recording on Dylan's phone. It showed James Brenner sitting in his camper covered in blood and cleaning his gun. The first thing I thought of is that Dylan is injured and pulled out his phone and began recording as a last effort before he died, but that's not what it was, I don't think. It's not believed that this video was taken intentionally. You know how on an iPhone and Android you can access the camera while the phone is still locked? It's believed James Brenner shot Dylan. He takes his phone inside for some reason. The only one I can think of is that Dylan is still barely alive and he doesn't want him to be able to call 911. Candace told East Idaho News, quote, "How did that phone start recording? It has driven us crazy. I'm pretty sure when Brenner took the phone, he just hit the wrong button or had a wrong swipe and had no clue. Then it started recording. The video clearly shows James covered in blood and cleaning off his gun. That shirt he was wearing was found, and the blood was a match to Dylan. James Brenner was charged with aggravated murder and desecration of a corpse. Also, he's got those firearm charges which have kept him in jail this whole time. It's so hard in these cases without a body. It's basically all circumstantial evidence. James has all these court appearances to explain the charges and preliminary stuff like that. He comes into court limping each time. Candace says it's all an act to get people to feel sorry for him or make him seem like he's this frail old man. James Brenner eventually admitted that he killed Dylan. I hate this next part, but it had to be done in order to bring closure to the family. James is going to take a plea deal. He will have his charges reduced if he can lead police to Dylan's body. The skeletal remains of 19-year-old Dylan Rounds were found in a remote area of Lucin, Utah. They had been there for almost 2 years. I don't know how they were missed with all these searches. Candace says that she's grateful her family has some kind of resolution. They had all these searches planned for the summer, and now they don't have to do them anymore. She says as soon as the state lab releases his body, they will bring him home and they can move forward from there. When asked about the motive, why did James kill Dylan? Candace told KSL News she believed James was mad that Dylan parked his truck in the shed, even though it was not James's shed, and Dylan had permission from the real owner. She said, quote, "It was absolutely shameful that that's what it is over, and that that's probably all we'll ever get out of him. There's no legal arrangement that can make him tell us exactly what happened that morning." Because he told police the location of Dylan's body, James's charges were reduced from aggravated murder to second-degree murder. He also got the desecration of a corpse charge dismissed. Dylan's father spoke in court telling James, "I wasn't going to let you come in here and limp like a little gimp and walk out without nobody saying anything to you at all. You don't have the balls enough to look at anybody in the eye. Turn around and look at the people who you've affected." The judge actually had to order James to look at Dylan's family sitting in the court, but he still refused. He declined to speak in court and didn't apologize to the family. He has zero remorse and won't take responsibility for what he did. Again, I'm glad the family has closure because they have Dylan's body now, but because of this plea deal, in June 2024, the judge sentenced James to 1 to 15 years in prison for the murder of Dylan. He had other charges, so he will spend a minimum of 3 years and a maximum of 30 years in prison. In January 2023, some of Dylan's friends, his real friends back home, took Dylan's vintage 1982 John Deere snowmobile to a snowmobile expo, and it ended up winning first place. Dylan's family had 8 necklaces made, and the charms contained little pieces of Dylan's crops, and they were set in epoxy. They were for a raffle, which it looks like has ended, or else I probably would have bought one. Dylan was a visionary and would have done amazing things in his lifetime. A nice kid who at only 19 was running a fully operational farm. Dylan would be only 22 years old today. He didn't deserve what happened to him. My heart goes out to Dylan and his family. That's it for this week, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care, and much love to you all. Intro music is Feral Angel Waltz, which is composed by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. All his music can be found on his website, incompetech.com.